Hey everybody, this is Allison from Allykatkreations. How are you? I'm hanging in. Before I start, please like, please share, and please subscribe. Interestingly enough, YouTube put the 3 subscribers back on my count list, but then it keeps going back up and down. Not that that really matters, but it makes me feel good that people are sharing, people are subscribing. I'm very appreciative to everybody who has been doing that for me. It's a way that you can help. I was able to buy myself another month of internet. That wasn't easy. And that was just off of me selling some stuff. If you have it within you to help me, a love donation is appreciated. Anything counts. Yeah. You know, things are going to go down, but I don't know what time frame things are going to be going down. All my cards keep telling me, and I have a rebirth happening, and all this stuff is going to go on, which is great, but like it's been saying that for 6 months, and like, when is it going to happen? And then people with opportunities are going to come down my way. It still hasn't happened, and I'm not being negative on it. It's just, you know, I'd like to eat more than once a day. I'm wasting away. So today I'm going to read the keys to the universe, and I'm going to continue number 7. And then later on today, because today is a black moon eclipse. So the reason why they call it a black moon eclipse is because this is the second new moon in the month of April. Even though it's the last day and it's going into May 1st, it's still considered April. So it's very rare. It's a very rare event. So I'll be doing some oracle polls for the collective and for the star seeds, and I'll see how far I get with that. Also, I got some books, and I can really only read one outright. But unlike the other books that I'm now having to redo, just putting my insights on things, I will do that with those books. So I want to thank the viewer who got me Beyond a Pale Horse, another Carlos Castaneda book. I'm really excited. And 2 Manly P. Hall books, and one is humongous. So I can't wait to dive into those. I'm going to try not to put those on the back burner, but I do want to catch up on making the other videos with the Law of One, the Enoch, the Wanderer's Handbook, and then eventually I will get back to Dolores Cannon. I'm still very upset with that, so it's going to be last. Chapter 27, the number 7, the number of perfection. Quote, and I saw in the right hand of him that sat on the throne a book written within and on the back side, sealed with 7 seals. And I beheld, and lo, in the midst of the throne and of the 4 beasts, and in the midst of the elders, stood a lamb as it had been slain, having 7 horns and 7 eyes, which are the 7 spirits of God sent forth into all the earth. Revelation. The book of Revelation abounds in the use of 7 in reference to completion, such as the 7 vials of the 7 last plagues, the 7 trumpet calls, the 7 thunders, the sounding of the 7 angels, the 7 kings, 5 of whom are fallen, the beast with the 7 heads. As we have said elsewhere, the book mentioned in our text is the great book of life, the Akashic Records, with its 7-fold manifestation, so frequently referred to in scriptural and occult literature, Within the great book is written all that is to manifest during the cycle, which brings, when the world is spoken, let there be light, and the spirit of life moves upon the face of the waters of chaos. The seven seals are the seven manifestations of the one life. In the solar system, the seven cosmic centers of force or powers of the heavenly man, and the seven great day periods or rounds in humanity, the seven great races, and in man made in the image of the sevenfold Elohim, the seven sacred centers of his body and his seven stages of growth, just as a stone thrown into a calm pool sets up even widening waves of vibration, so the light shot out into the darkness of chaos causes sevenfold wave of manifestation throughout the cosmos. Quote, the great book as applied to man is his body with its seven sacred centers. It is sealed with seven seals because although individually man can open these centers as he evolves Godward, for humanity as a whole, they open only as it passes through the seven great races, each of which opens to man a new sense, new conditions, and new experiences. These centers are the avenues through which man comes into conscious communion with the higher realms, but they are sealed upon through normal growth. He has evolved to a point where he can control and utilize them. The fact that the great book of the Akashic records is sealed with seven seals, which no man is worthy to open, should effectively dispose of the claims of those who say they have transcribed certain works directly from the Akashic records. There is, however, a reflecting medium, which is mistaken by many psychics for the Akashic records. This reflects both from the above and below, but look at from the earth, it reflects more from present day conditions than from the Akashic records, thus mixing the two. Number 7, when completed in man, may be called the Christ gift, the prototype of the Christmas tree, which is sealed with 7 seals of love, patience, purity, trust, perseverance, endurance, and devotion. These are the king's seals, which must be opened and manifested one by one. For even if one remains sealed, the neophyte will not bear the mark on his forehead, which seals him as one of the elect. Quote, the Lamb had 7 horns and 7 eyes. The horn is a universal symbol of power. Horns are the principal defense and strength of many animals, enabling them to maintain their supremacy over those having no horns. For this reason, the ram becomes the leader and defender of the flock. The sheep begin without horns. A horn symbolizes a ruler, a king, or a military power. To exalt one's horn or cause it to bud or grow is strengthen and prosper. To lift one's horn, is to become arrogant. To cut off one's horn is to weaken or to be crushed. The horn is also a symbol of plenty, both in the physical and the spiritual life, showing that the ram, although slain and reborn as the lamb, must still lead and feed the flock through the plenteous outpourings from its 7 horns. The 7 horns symbolize the 7 great powers of man, whose attainment are steps upon the path of mastery, along with the Christ light, much lead him. The 7 eyes, which are the 7 spirits of God sent forth into all the earth, in this condition symbolize the 7th in the spiritual insight, which is the accompaniment and reward of such conquering, or the perfected clear seeing upon all planes, as well as the watchful care of the spirit. The 7 stars in the right hand of the Ancient of Days are the 7 cosmic forces of planetary deities. Another aspect of these same forces is symbolized by the lights of the 7 candles, but in this case they are confined to an earthly vehicle. The light merely shining through a limited earthly conception, for although the candlesticks are golden, pure, They rest upon the earth, while in the case of the stars, the light shines direct from the absolute. It is also indicates that the great law holds even the planets and planetary deities in its hand, as above, so below, the one light in both stars and candlesticks. Do not confuse the teaching with pantheism, for it is not. We do not teach that there are many co-equal gods, but there are many divine entities, manifestation of one God, the Absolute. The great law has two aspects, one represented by the 7 stars, the 7 manifestations of the great law in its purity, and other represented by the 7 candlesticks or its chosen vehicles of expression on earth. These vehicles, while of gold and originally reflecting the light of the 7 stars in the purity, are nevertheless susceptible to contamination by the mirror of earth, as the rebukes given to the 7 churches in the next chapter will show. A candlestick is a specially created, manufactured instrument for the one purpose of holding a candle that the light may shine out to illuminate and guide humanity. The Sofer Yetzirah agrees with occult philosophy when it states that out of the 7 letters and the 7 numbers, colors, tones, and the planetary forces with which they are identified, there were created the 7 worlds, the 7 heavens, the 7 earths, the 7 seas, 7 rivers, 7 deserts, 7 days. The 7 worlds are the 7 globes, which compose a world chain. Among Kabbalists, the 7 worlds are called the original, intelligible, celestial, elementary, lesser, astral, infernal, karma, loka, or Hades, and physical and temporal. The 7 heavens are the 7 divisions of subplanes of the astral, the reflective, etheric, vital, desire, mental, inspirational, and ecstatic. The 7 earths are the 7 states of consciousness experienced on earth: primitive animal consciousness, self-consciousness, tribal or class consciousness, ethical or duty to others, astral or psychic, spiritual or Christ consciousness, and universal or cosmic consciousness. Whew, guys, that's the densities. The 7 seas refer to the 7 states of illusion. The 7 rivers are the 7 streams and force in man: blood, nerve, pranic, astral, mental, psychic, and spiritual. The 7 deserts are the barren wastes of doubts, fears, misconceptions, disappointments, disillusion, poverty, and ill health. It is on account of his sepentary nature that the sun is spoken of by the ancients of one who is driven by the 7 horses, equal to the meters of the Vedas. As also there he has 7 rays, as indeed he has the 7 beings in the sun are the 7 holy ones, self-born from the inherent power in his matrix of mother substance. It is they who send the 7 principal forces called rays, which at the beginning of Pralyaya will center into 7 new suns for the next Manavatra. The 7th path in the Sefer Yetzirah is that of occult intelligence, a combination of faith and intellect. In Hinduism, the path of perfection is made up of a series of 7s, each 7 making a definite step or a victory won by the neophyte. These steps are spoken of as portals or gates because the neophyte must pass through experiences and enter states of consciousness which are close to him until he brings the golden key to each, or until he has obtained the mystic power which will open them. These 7 keys are as follows: To the first, portal, charity, and all-embracing love. To the second, harmony and fearlessness. To the third, patience. To the fourth, indifference to pleasure as to pain. To the fifth, dauntless energy. To the sixth, ceaseless contemplation. And to the seventh, the key which opens the final gate, whose entrance makes of man a god. Number 7 is held to represent magic in its fullness. Ephesius Levi says, the virtue of the septenary is absolute in magic, for the number is decisive in all things. Hence, all religions have concentrated in their rites. In other words, man, through the power of the Christ force, and number 7, has claimed his heritage. He can now stand upon the foundation stone and allow the divine triangle to pour down its triune blessings upon his head. The 5-pointed star and has gained 2 more points, the rod by which man holds his 5 powers in his right hand, and the dot in the center, which synthesizes all his powers, the true magic pentagram. It is man's mind reinforced by the elementary potencies. Viewed as a compound of 6 and 1, the centenary and the unity, number 7, was the invisible center, the spirit of everything, as there exists no hexagonal body without a 7th property being found as the central point in it. The symbol of the star with 7 points was sometimes used in the ancient temples of schools of mysteries, but it was used as an erotic bind, for it was well known by the initiated priests that a 7-pointed star was not a true symbol. A star with 7 points would necessarily focus the forces which the point contracted into a central point, thus giving the figure an 8-fold power. The symbol was used to instruct the neophyte in the perfection of number 7 and to install into his mind a reverence for its potencies. While the force invoked was the number 8, which is both evolution, balance, and poise, all of those which are qualities necessary for initiation. But until he had passed the initiation, the 6-pointed star with its central dot could not be entrusted to him, lest he misuse its potencies and powers. Hence, in true Stoic symbolism, there is no 7-pointed star, as it cannot be formed by the combination of any 2 simple geometric figures, although it is sometimes seen in erotic emblems. The geometrical symbol of the 7 is the interlaced triangles with the dot in the center, the dot being the same germinal point we find within the circle or the creative nucleus of the mundane egg, which has evolved during its 6-day period of creation through nature and man and become the synthesized focal point for the forces of the 6 manifestations, as circle with the dot in the middle represents deity as the source of all. So the star with the dot in the middle represents deity manifesting through the perfect unfolding and balancing of the positive and negative triangles, describing under number 6. The 6 points represent the 6 days required to bring forth the microcosm, while the dot within the throne upon which the deity rests on the 7th day and pronounces all his works good. As for the dot in the circle represents the throne of deity in the macrocosm, so the dot in the 6-pointed star represents the throne of deity established and manifesting in the microcosm. The dot in the center represents the soul of all things, as the star represents the body, for there is no body which 6 lines or 6 directions of space, north, south, east, west, up, down, will not enclose, and which is not an outward manifestation of 7th point in the center. The symbol therefore represents a perfected spiritual or nirvana body when obtained. Sorry for the mispronunciation there. In its unity, primordial life is the seventh or highest principle. The Viprakarati, the light of the unmanifested logos. But in its differentiation, it becomes Fohat, or the seven suns. The former is symbolized by the central point in the double triangle, the latter by the hexagon itself, or the six limbs of micro Prosperous, the seventh being Makluth, the bride, or the Christian Kabbalist. By the Essenes, the symbol is called the seal of Solomon, for they recognize Solomon as the personification of his Stoic wisdom. And to this day, even among Christian peoples, it is still looked upon as powerful talisman, especially in Russia and Poland. The Pythagoreans called it the symbol of creation, and the Egyptians similarly looked upon it as a union of fire and water, or generation. The seventh Sifra is called Netzach, firmness and victory, corresponding to the divine name Jehovah. Tazabath, the Lord of hosts, and the angelic names Elohim and Tharishis. Cannot do that. The brilliant ones. Hence, man can evolve intellectually to a point where he can unfold the sixth Sifra. That is, he can intertwine the divine attributes with the physical and thus become the magic symbol of Solomon's seal, the seal of wisdom. But until he has unfolded or manifested the seventh point and gains a complete victory, until he has fixed his gaze upon the star of initiation, the Christ Son, and made that the center from which all his works proceeded, he may be a magician with mighty power, but he is not accepted as a white magician. The six represents wonderful intellectual development, but it must recognize, accept, and respond to the spiritual overshadowing of the divine illumination of the dot in the center, the perfection of seven is reached. The seventh key is the hieroglyph of the sacred cemetery of royalty, of the priesthood, of triumph and true result by struggle. It is magic, power in all its force, the true holy kingdom. In the Hermetic philosophy, it is the quintessence resulting from the union of the two forces of the great magic agent, the Akasha, the astral light. In the Greek legend, Minos, king of Crete, demanded every 9th year a toll of 7 youths and 7 maidens who were sacrificed to Minotaur, a monster with the body of a man and the head of a bull. This monster was confined in a labyrinth in whose passage any of the victims who attempted to escape lost their way and were eventually devoured. When the time for the third sacrifice drew near, Theseus, taking the place of the youths and maidens, went to Crete to slay the monster. At his landing, Ariadne, the daughter of Minos and granddaughter of the sun god Helios, fell in love with Theseus and gave him a thread, which he unwound as he proceeded, and thus was enabled to find his way out of the labyrinth after slaying the monster. The myth symbolizes the positive masculine and the negative feminine aspects of 7 planetary hierarchies through which the great tests of humanity are brought out. Since the bull symbolizes the symbol and sign Taurus and the generative power, the meaning is that the man whose passions, bull, rule and dominate the body, occupy the seat of government, the head, is confined and shut in on every side by the labyrinth of earth conditions. In other words, the animal man, while evolving through the lower aspects of force, symbolizes by the 3 deacons of Taurus, degrades and devours the most beautiful planetary influences until the close of the 3rd cycle or 3rd great initiation, when the real self, Theseus, by following the thread of love and intuition given him by the feminine aspect of daughter of the sun, the third decan of Taurus, being ruled by Venus, is able to slay the monster and set the planetary influences free from the domination of the animal man, that they may accomplish their true mission of opening to the initiated man the gates of paradise or the New Jerusalem. Among the Greeks, the sun is portrayed as a chariot drawn by 7 horses, representing 7 planetary hierarchies or rays. And in myth, Pantheon, the mortal son of Helios, the sun god, essays to drive this chariot of the sun with disastrous results. The meaning of this allegory is that man must perfect his 7 principles and his 7 powers on earth and become more than mortal ere he can safely hold the reins and control the 7 planetary forces. It also refutes a popular modern teaching that because man has a divine father, he is therefore now, in his present undeveloped state, a god within all the powers of God, successfully to negotiate the circle of the zodiac in his own strength. The fate of those who espouse this doctrine is as certain as was Pantheon's, for like him, they must face all the monsters of the zodiac, especially Scorpio, which caused the disaster to Pantheon. As the legend reads, here the scorpion extended his 2 great arms, with his tail and crooked claws stretched over 2 signs of the zodiac, Virgo and Scorpio, which were formerly one sign and represented in Syrio-Chaldean magic as God and the devil. When the boy beheld him, reeking with poison and menacing with his fangs, his courage failed and the reins fell from his hands. The test of Scorpio, the test of sex, is thus fittingly described. It is under the test that so many self-styled gods in mortal frame fail. And as the Pantheon fiery steeds of thought run away with them, and they are dashed to the earth. The dragons and serpents of antiquity were all 7-headed, as was the beast of Apocalypse, a head for each of the 7 races, and had 7 hairs on each head, representing the 7 sub-races of each great race. The 4 dragons of wisdom were composed of 7 constellations each. The 7 northern constellations made up this black. Sorry, guys. The text is all messed up. Composed of 7 constellations each. The 7 northern constellations made up the Black Warrior. The 7 eastern, the White Tiger. The 7 southern, the Vermilion Bird. And the 7 western, the Azure Dragon. The 7-headed Akkadian serpent, whose heads multiply from 7 to 1,000, fittingly symbolizes the 7 principles of man in nature with their manifold aspects. Number 7 was also held sacred to several gods, for instance, Osiris, whose body was cut into 2 by 7 pieces, Mars and his 7 attendants, Apollo and his 7-stringed lyre. Chapter 28, the 7 principles of man. The one life is, as explained, a film for creative or formative purposes. It manifests in 7 states, which, with their septenary subdivisions, are the 49 fires mentioned in the sacred books. To men it gives all that is bestowed on all the rest of the manifested units in nature, but develops furthermore the reflection of all its 49 fires in him. Each of his 7 principles is an heir to the full, and a partaker of the 7 principles of the Great Mother, the 7 doctrines of Levonski. The 7 principles of which man is composed from, the densest and most material to the highest and most spiritual, are as follows. The first principle, the physical body. While the physical body is the lowest expression of the real or divine self, it is one of the most important. Although at the opposite pole from spirit, it nevertheless has within it the centers in and through which each of the higher principles must focus to manifest on earth. The body, therefore, should not be looked upon as a hampering garment to be despised and escaped from as soon as possible, for it is an instrument which is absolutely necessary for the manifestation of the higher self, and without which it cannot accomplish its mission in the physical world. The viewpoint of Christian mysticism is therefore just the opposite to much teaching that passes for true Oriental philosophy, because the animal body is passionate, seductive, self-willed, hard to train, and controlled, until it has been purified, spiritualized, and made in the willing servant of the real man. Many Eastern students seek to weaken it, maim it, or even kill out its natural forces, that they may ultimately escape from the bondage of the flesh and from rebirth. But the Christian mystic seeks to perfect in it every part and have every function in its highest state of activity, that it may be a perfect instrument, well knowing that rebirth must continue until he has built up a perfected and spiritualized organism through which perfectly to express the Christ force for the redemption of himself, his fellow men, and the lower kingdoms. The physical body is made in the image of the spiritual body of the real man. It is therefore an organism in which all the creative energies of the sevenfold Elohim are synthesized, and through which they must manifest. Hence, the soul must again and again build a physical body until ultimately it builds one, which it can perfectly express the divine man. It may be compared to a switchboard containing terminals for the ramifications of a mighty electrical system, some of its currents connecting it with the higher principles in all parts of the universe, even the distant planets, all of which affect and manifest through the physical body. The second principle, the astral body. The astral body is the shadow or pattern sent into the mother's womb, into the meshes of which the physical materials composing the flesh and bone of the future man are built. Its focal points in the physical body are the spleen and liver. It is the seat of sensation, and its avenue of operation is through the nerves. The spleen is the seat of the higher and more refined sensations, the liver of the coarser and more material. The astral body is a material body, as material that under certain conditions of condensation, it can be photographed with an ordinary camera, but the matter of which it is composed is more tenuous, ethereal, and of a higher rate of vibration than physical matter. It is also plastic, that it is capable of being acted upon from within the real self, from the mental world through thought, from the passional world of the animal soul through the emotions, and from the physical world through the nerves. It is also easily affected by the vibrations from the beings and forces in all the realms of the astral world. This is also the body which eludes from a medium during a materialization seance, its plastic condition allowing it to take on the appearance of an entity desiring to manifest, or even the thoughts of its sitters. It is connected to the spleen of the medium by an astral cord, the rupture of which would mean death to the medium. Hence, it is dangerous to pass between a materialized form and its medium. This body of sensation must be purified, perfected, and ruled by the real man, for it is an important garment of the soul as well as the image of man. The third principle, the life force. This principle is the aspect of the one life, which is sometimes called the sun principle or prana. This force has its seat in the physical body in the solar plexus, its point of contact through the umbilicus, and its action through the lungs, blood, and spine. Since this principle is a stream of force from the universal cosmic life principle, or the breath of life, it is a connecting link which binds all the principles not only together, but through the one life, to all that is manifestation. It is through a perfect understanding and control of the principle that the adept rules all his lower principles, and while still in the physical body, learns to make conscious contact with the higher self. This force must be according to the laws of harmony and purity and be under the guidance of the divine will, or it will be like steam escaping from leaks in a boiler. First, it fails to give its power to the engine body, which consequently slows down, grows weak, devitalizes, and ultimately stops. Second, it acts as a destroyer, just as escaping steam fills the engine room, rusts the engine, and becomes a menace to the engineer, the real self. Therefore, the principle of the life force is a creator or bringer of life to the physical and astral bodies, the preserver and regulator of life and vitality, and finally the destroyer. During the lower stages of development, as in the animal and undeveloped man, this force is guided by the subconscious mind according to the law of harmony. But in the higher stages there, where mind is more active, its normal currents and actions are interfered with by man's impure thoughts, habits, and desires, also by anything that defiles the breath. Hence, we have physical inharmony, sickness, and disease as manifested or as stages in the process of disintegration. The fourth principle, the desire body or animal soul, the principle together with the physical and astral bodies and the life force, completes the fourfold foundation stone laid by the higher self in the physical world. For only as a divine ray sent down into matter can find a foundation composed of the elements belonging to the worlds in which it seeks expression, can manifest there and garner the experiences of those worlds. Therefore, the earthly instrument of the manifestation is built up just as is a house. First, the plan or pattern is conceived and the framework erected. The outer structure is built around it. The life force warms it, and the animal soul, like a janitor, takes charge. Then it is ready for occupancy by the owner, the real self. The animal soul karma includes the animal desires, passions, sensations, and the subconscious mind, together with the desires, passions, and emotions brought to it from the astral and mental worlds, where the astral can transmit both the good from above and the evil from below. The subconscious mind, composed of the synthesis of the consciousness of each cell, organ, nerve center, and force in these lower bodies, is the means by which the animal soul rules over the body functions. It is also the regulator and ruler of the waves of life force and the breath in the body, and through them keeps the body in health. It also correlates all the desires, emotions, and sensations, which all cement the four lower principles together and make a firm foundation on which the three higher principles may build their temple of the living God. In short, this is the stone which the builders, both Oriental and Christian teachers, have heretofore rejected because apparently so hopelessly perverted by man's wrong thinking and so impregnated with disintegration and death, but which ultimately must become first for the individual and then for the race, the headstone of the corner. The animal soul has its seat in the liver and its point of contact in the sex centers, while it rules the body through the brain of the subconscious mind, the solar plexus. It must gather strength and power from all sensations, desires, and experiences, and devote all of its life forces to the one end, namely toward erecting the temple in which the Christ may dwell among men, and from that which the Christian radiance may send forth its redeeming power to all the kingdoms. The animal soul is therefore the synthesis of the four lower principles overshadowed by rational mind, the lower manas. The noise level in my neighborhood is absolutely crazy. When it attracts to itself and holds captive the rational mind through animal desire, it becomes a personal temper. The desires and appetites of the animal soul, which in the animal kingdom are perfectly normal, when ruled by the group soul of the species through instinct, in the human kingdom must be ruled by the rational mind. But under the liberty allowed by human free will, they tend to run wild and follow their own inclinations. They thus often enhance and magnify the normal animal instincts and seduce and drag men down below the level of the beasts. This is the great fight in man, the animal soul seeking to gratify unrestrainingly its natural appetites, and the higher self endeavoring to make it follow the higher path through the guidance of the rational mind. It is the animal soul that must be curbed, made to occupy its true place and become the faithful servant of the rational mind, as the later must be the faithful servant of the superconscious mind, or the mind of the higher self. The fifth principle, mind, or spiritual self-consciousness. Mind is the third aspect of the divine triangle or trinity. The immortal soul, the immortal self, the soul, the Father in heaven, which overshadows the human personality, the three-tongued flame that never dies. The true mind, therefore, transcends its lower expression, intellect, to a far greater degree than intellect transcends instinct. The principle is usually presented only in the dual aspect of higher and lower mind, or manas. When this division is correct as far as it goes, it leaves much to be desired. For in reality, mind, like all the principles, is secondary, with the three main divisions corresponding to mind, to the body, mind, and spirit, the subconscious, the rational, and the spiritual or superconscious mind. Much confusion has been caused by historic writers classing all mental and psychic manifestations not attributable to the mind of the ordinary waking consciousness as belonging to the subconscious mind, thus trying to account for both animal instinct and the most spiritual inspiration and ecstasy as coming from the same source. Such a manifestly absurd conclusion is easily avoided if we were to remember that the prefix sub means under or below. Therefore, the word subconscious should be used to designate only those aspects of mind which lie below the threshold of the rational mind. These include the consciousness of the individual cells and organs, together with animal instincts, which constitutes the mind of the animal soul, and from which we can never expect to receive inspiration and spiritual guidance from the latter must come from above. The rational mind is the ordinary waking consciousness which functions through the intellect and has its seat in the cortex of the brain. It is the middle aspect of mind, and like the middle number 5, it marks the difference between the human and the lower kingdoms, but overshadowing and blending into them through its subconscious aspects, just as it in turn is overshadowed by and is capable of blending into the superconscious mind. All the lower kingdoms are under the dominion of man's thought. When self-consciousness awoke, the rational mind was given control over instinct and should therefore stand upright on the foundation stone and guide all the lower principles. But until the rational mind is enlightened from above and realizes its responsibility, it only too often reveals in the desires of the animal soul and leads to the higher intellectual power to enhance and degrade what should be but a normal animal instinct. The spiritual or superconscious mind is the real fifth principle, which overshadows the personality and whose informing ray makes man an intellectual and rational instead of instinctive animal. Hence, only when its two lower and limited aspects have become united with the higher, and the higher self or soul has perfect control over its instrument. The personality has man reached number 10. From 1 through 5, the lower kingdoms struggle towards self-consciousness, but from 5 to 10, man fights the battle allegorized in scriptures under the various names, such as the war in heaven, Agamemnon, but all referring to the war between the higher and the lower selves for the control of the personality. The first great battle is one when the spiritual mind is able to inspire, not force, the personality to respond to its overshadowing love and wisdom, and the rational mind sees the desirability and logical necessity of setting out in earnest to climb the heights to its Father's home. Thus, life after life, the spiritual mind reaches down into the experiences of earth life, sifting and weighing them and storing up the good, the beautiful, the true to be blended with the sixth principle, overshadowed and illuminated by the seventh, the one ray of the divine. When thus blended and illuminated, it becomes the immortal self, the higher self, the personal God, the highest point of attainment for each individual. When thus blended with the sixth and seventh principle, the mind is also the reincarnated ego with a form rupa, which prevails during the whole life cycle of the fourth round, while its sosic or resemblance, the personal ego, has to win in its mortality. For the four lower principles, since they pertain to the physical world, are mortal and perishable until redeemed. The higher self, being purely spiritual, can have no direct consciousness in the physical world. Hence, to enable it to complete its manifestation in all worlds and to become a redeemer, it must send down a ray of itself into the human animal body, that through this expression in matter, it may complete its destiny. This ray is called the Antakarana, the bridge which joins the lower to the higher, the earthly to the divine. It is also called the bridge across the great abyss, over which the pilgrim must cross to the eternal shore. For it is over the ray from the spiritual mind that the rational mind of man must send every aspiration of the heart together for the ultimate lesson of good out of every condition experienced by it or the animal soul. During each life, the higher self has garners all the spiritual experiences of its ray or reflection, and upon its withdrawal rests in the bosom of the Father, while the animal soul, with all that has not been redeemed, disintegrates. Quote, the essence of the divine ego is pure flame, an entity to which nothing can be added and from which nothing can be taken. It cannot therefore be diminished even by countless numbers of lower minds, detached from it like flames from a flame. The story of the crucifixion is an allegory of the fate of the five principle, for just as the divine must take upon itself individuality in the world of formation by embodying a ray from itself in the spiritual mind or higher manas, so in turn must this divine son take upon its personality, become flesh, and temporarily be separated from its father. It is this ray, therefore, which makes itself responsible through the lower expression for all the sins of its various personalities. This is the real vicarious atonement. Hence, the abyss is often described as inhabitable by monsters of evil seeking to clutch the pilgrim ray and pull it down as it strives across the bridge to the Father's home. Again, the Antakarana is the cross of means of which the Christ principle is expressed in matter. It is the expression. This true, although for ages holding a most important place in the mysticism, was expressed by the early church as bearing too close a resemblance to the story of Jesus, which is but an allegory expressing this truth. In another sense, the spiritual mind is the mansion in heaven prepared for its lower expression or son, that where the Father is, there may be the Son also. But it is the Son or personality who must furnish this mansion by the pure thoughts, aspirations, and lessons, which the rational mind of each personality is all the time storing up in the spiritual mind. At the next incarnation, the spiritual mind again sends down a ray and builds up another personality which embodies as inherent faculties all the experiences gained and powers unfolded during the previous incarnation. In the gospel allegory, the Trinity of spiritual soul is called the Father who sent his only begotten Son, lower manas or rational mind, into earth conditions, not only to express the divine attributes of his Father, but also, when one with his Father, to become the Redeemer by giving up his life to, or Christ for us, that literally whosoever believeth on him shall not perish, but have eternal life. That is, whoever so believeth that the mind is a ray from the divine mind given to man as a means by which he can garner wisdom out of experience, through whose illumination can uplift, inform, and redeem all beneath him, also as it means to find and become one with his divine Father, such as one can never perish or be separated from his Father, and will ultimately cross the Antakazarana in safety and dwell forever in the bosom of the Father. Then the abyss will no longer exist for him, for it has been swallowed up and has become the way, the truth, and the life. The spiritual mind has its seat in the body at the spiritual heart, a secret point back of the breast, which corresponds to the physical heart, and the heart being the seat of the physical life, and the spiritual heart being the seat of the spiritual life. Its organ is the body of the pineal gland. Sixth principle, the Christ principle or spiritual soul. Strictly speaking, the spiritual soul is the highest principle, as the divine ray is no principle, but an outpouring of the all-pervading and universal essence of the one flame, the absolute, the cause of all the principles. Just as the rational mind is a vehicle for the ray for the spiritual mind, so the spiritual soul is the vehicle for the ray from the divine. While it is generally classified as the Christ principle, this is more or less of an stoic bind, for the Christ principle is the great creative principle or aspect of the divine on all planes. It becomes the creator of spiritual differentiation only when individualized and manifesting through the spiritual soul and spiritual mind or higher self. It manifests in the divine world as creative ideation, in the mental world as the creative power of thought, and in the physical world as the powerful fertilization or sex. The spiritual soul can have no manifestation or consciousness in the lower worlds except through the spiritual mind and its various rays. When the spiritual soul and the spiritual mind are blended and illuminated by the divine ray, they become the divine trinity, the higher self, or reincarnating ego. The spiritual soul stands to each of its expressions or personalities in the same relation that the universal soul stands to each individualized spiritual soul. It is not human but divine and therefore immortal, a pillar of light, an incarnation of one of the seven flames. It cannot complete its expression in the lower worlds and become redeemer, however, until it clothes itself with and manifests through a human body. Its seat is not the physical body, but in the astral body. It contacts the physical body directly only when the psychic center in the middle of the forehead, the radium center, realization, is awakened. The seventh principle, the divine or Atma. This is called the seventh principle merely for purposes of a Stoic classification, as it is not a principle of man, but a ray of pure spirit from the absolute. It can contact the human body only as the higher astral centers are consciously awakened and then made subservient to reaching into the higher realms where the divine holds sway. Just as the 7 notes of music are completed and synthesized in the 8th note, which leads into a new octave, so are the 7 principles of man synthesized in the aura. This is sometimes called the 7th principle, but in reality, it is the synthesis of all, having a point of contact in each. Woo! Chapter 29, my favorite part. The 7 Pleiades and the 7 Rishis. Canst thou bind the sweet influence of the Pleiades or lose the bands of Orion? Job. There I beheld 7 stars like great blazing mountains and like spirits entreating me. The Book of Enoch. The constellation Taurus, the bull, contains over 400 stars, among which there are said to be more bright stars than in any other constellation, and chief among which are the 7 Pleiades and their sisters, the 5 Hades. And since in every age this constellation has been a favorite theme for myth and allegory, we may well expect to find important occult significance connecting with it. One myth is that these 12 sisters saw their brother Hyas killed by a snake while hunting in Libya. They laminated his death so passionately that Zeus, out of compassion, translated them into stars, 5 into the Hades in the head and 7 into the Pleiades in the neck of the bull. The Hades are called the rainy ones, and the great importance is attached to this group when it rises at the same time as the sun nearly during the month of May, at which time the rainy season begins. We therefore find that among the ancients, the Hades represent the fertilizing principle of moisture. They symbolize the feminine or astral aspect of the 5 senses, which laminate that their brother, the physical senses, is so deadened by the snake of matter and the perversion of the creative powers that they are cut off from him and must remain in the higher realms, that he can no longer commune with them except as he reaches up into the heaven world. They continually exert, however, the gentle moisture of their fertilizing principle, which like dew falls from heaven or the astral world and helps man to find the 7 spiritual senses representing by the Pleiades. This physical and astral senses should be in harmonious accord and development, that when we see a physical object, we should also see its astral counterpart. When we hear a physical sound, we should also hear its astral expression, and so on with each of the other senses. Another myth has it that the 7 Pleiades and their mother met the hunter Orion one day in the woods. The sight of their beauty so inflamed his desires that for 5 years he pursued them through the dense forest, now losing sight of them and now seeing they flying before him. Finally, Zeus, in pity, turned them into white doves, which flew to heaven and were translated into stars, although during the flight one dove was lost among the wandering rocks. Homer in the Odyssey alludes to them as the doves who brought ambrosia from the west. Since doves always symbolize the spirit, we have no difficulty in connecting the Pleiades with spiritual forces or the perfection and spiritualization of man's 7 senses. While the spiritual sun rises in the mystical east, we are told that it must shine even unto the west. And it is man who, by the unfoldment of his 7 spiritual senses, must bring back from the farthest point of the manifestation matter, the ambrosia or substance of the gods, with which to nourish his immortal body. Orion is represented in mythology as a giant with a girdle, a sword, a lion's skin, and a club, while his dog Sirius follows him and the Pleiades fly before him. Orion here represents man in pursuit of the higher attainments of the spiritual senses. He is indeed a giant girdled with strength. A girdle is a symbol of priestly office. Thus, when Aaron and his son were anointed by the priest in Exodus, they received the girdle of linen thread of 3 colors, blue, purple, and scarlet, as does the Brahmin body in India today, where initiated into his caste. As the Celtic word for a belt is Syros, so the Celtic name for Christ is Syros, meaning belt god. The belt name all Druids who identified with the sun and his conscious activity. All words like belt, girth, band, and gird name the same daily orbit of the sun, which in the picture language costume of the Druids was the gilded belt. The girdle is also a covenant of strength and represents the current of spiritual force which circles around man's body just below the breasts. Thus Isaiah says, quote, "I will clothe him with thy robe and strengthen him with thy girdle," end quote. And again, quote, "And righteousness shall be the girdle of his loins, and faithfulness the girdle of his reins," end quote. Also, the Son of Man who stood in the midst of the 7 candlesticks is described in Revelation as girt about the paps with a golden girdle. For when man can hold the 7 stars in his right hand, his girdle will be a visible current of spiritual life force passing through his heart, through the life center in the right breast, and through the center of illumination in the spinal cord opposite the heart. The sword of Orion symbolizes the power of man's dominion over the earth, obtained by fighting and struggling with the density of physical conditions. This is the sword of the spirit through whose right use man may win his way back to his former high spiritual estate in Eden. The lion symbolizes spiritual courage, strength, and love. The only forces represented by the lion of the tribe of Judah found worthy to open the seals of the great book of life, Revelation. We have already explained the aspect of man's represented by the lion, but Orion represents man as he is today with his 5-fold development, forever pursuing his 7 spiritual powers with eager passion, yet never quite able to obtain them. Hence, instead of having obtained the real inner powers of the lion, he is able to manifest only their lower or outer expression, the lion's skin. In other words, with the courage, strength, and love, man persistently follows the flashing wings of the spiritual doves through the shadows of the forest of life. Yet because his courage partakes of recklessness, his strength is tainted with cruelty, and his love inflamed by passion, he never fully obtains, and will not until he, too, finds his place in the heaven world. Orion's club symbolizes man's physical power and personal will. For alas, man too often hopes to claim his heritage through mere physical prowess and personal will, instead by the use of the sword of spirit. His dog Sirius represents man's animal nature, trained to keep its appointed place. Like for a faithful dog, it should follow where man leads, and he is friend and helper. As Orion unsuccessfully pursues the heavenly doves for 5 years, so will man unsuccessfully pursue his higher spiritual attainments through the 5 periods during which his physical senses rule. Only when his 6th and 7th senses begin to unfold and Zeus transforms him into a star, he enters the heavenly realms, will he find the doves. The Pleiades appear in the northern heavens at the beginning of spring, and wield a mighty influence over the earth and its inhabitants. Not only do we find Job recognizing the power of their influence, but it is greatly taught by the ancient sages that this group ruled over the 7 races and 7 sub-races of mankind, determining also the great changes which accompany the beginning and endings of racial and planetary cycles. The Hottentots worship the Pleiades, celebrating their annual appearance above the eastern horizon with great rejoicing. As soon as the constellation appears, all the mothers with their children ascend the nearest hill and teach the children to stretch out their arms toward the friendly stars. They also worship Hades under the name Tuzib, the rain god. They call the stars the souls of the deceased. According to the Greek legend, the Pleiades are the 7 daughters of Atlas and Poloni. In one version, all save Merope married gods and became mothers of the famous heroes who founded cities, nations, and subraces. Merope married a mortal, Sisyphus, and hence is said to hide her head in shame. Quote, they are regarded by Mulder and others in astronomy as the central group of the system of the Milky Way. The Pleiades, Alcyone especially, are thus considered, even in astronomy, as a central point around which our universe of fixed stars revolves, the force from which and into which the divine breath motion works incessantly during the Manvaratara. These influences, however, must always be considered in connections with the positive aspects of executors, the 7 stars in constellation Ursa Minor, or the Great Bear. Quote, they were 2 constellations with 7 stars each. We called them the 2 bears, but the stars of the lesser bear once were considered to be the 7 heads of the polar dragon. In Egypt, the Great Bear was a constellation of Typhon. These stars are called the Sapta Rishi, or 7 rishis. Although Ursa Major was cataloged by Ptolemy at having 8 stars, by Hevelius as having 12, nevertheless, its 7 brightest stars constitute one of the most characteristic figures in the northern sky, and are called the Hindus the husbands of the Pleiades. The fact that so many of the ancient writers mentioned only Pleiades, the Rishis, the Hydries, and Orion had modern astronomers for a long time to believe that these were the only constellations known in those days. But recent scientific discoveries are collaborating so many of the old myths, legends, and allegories that it is easily understood that only these groups were mentioned by the ancients because they were the great importance from a mystical and occult standpoint. Modern research will plainly show that the stars surrounding us do not constitute a simple but a double system, a fact that was well known to the sages. For it has been shown that many stars, wide separated and apparently belonging to separate systems, are mysteriously related to each other, especially the Pleiades and the Great Bear. It seems difficult to account for the very remarkable and unsystemized distribution of the motions unless we suppose that the stars from 2 more or less separate systems superimpose, and it has been found possible by assuming 2 drifts were substantially assigned velocities to account very satisfactory for the observed motions. During the present Iron Age, it is the masculine positive force of the Rishis that have been dominant, rather than the feminine force of the Pleiades. For the influence of the Pleiades is exerted less upon the immediate events in the mundane sphere than upon the higher planes, yet it is always the feminine force which brings forth the great changes which appear on earth, as the dominance of the cycle of one subrace gives place to the next. For corresponding reasons, during the cycle of the masculine masters of wisdom manifest in earth conditions, the feminine masters working in the higher realms. Meanwhile, it is 7 rishis who mark the time and duration of events in our septenary life cycle. There are mysteries as their supposed wives, the Pleiades. In fact, it is largely the positive and negative powers emanating from the 2 constellations that give to number 7 its mystical significance. Again, 7 is closely connected with the occult significance of the Pleiades, the 6 visible or 7 actual sisters. The Pleiades are needed for the completion of the most secret and mysterious of all astronomical and religious symbols. The importance of the constellation is lying in the foundation of the universe is illustrated in the book of Job. When Saturn, the great initiator, demands of the candidate the mystery questions, which will reveal his knowledge of the secret cycles and the spiritual insignificance of the influences emanating from Mazzaroth zodiac. The ability to understand, correlate with, and bind the sweet influences of the Pleiades is their direct indicated as a necessary requirement for initiation of both man and the planet. As the Pleiades are connected with the closing of cycles, as their number 7 perfection indicates, they have to do with the tests with which each soul must pass it can evolve out of one cycle of spiritual unfoldment into the next. Hence, to bind their influences means that the candidate must regain the power of the face of their karma of his old or closing cycle and successfully pass through the changes which the steps of initiation inevitably bring. This power is gained by assimilating the sweet influence of love, compassion, faith, intrepidity, action, and patience, and devotion focused by the Pleiades. By the Hindus, the Pleiades are called the nurses of the planet Mars, the commander of celestial armies. In India, they are connected with their nurseling, the war god. Oh boy. Crucifixion. It was the Pleiades who gave the name to the god Crucifixion, being the planet Mars astronomically. Again, guys, I'm not good with these names, especially Indian ones, so I'm not here to butcher or disrespect anybody's language. Even when I put it through a voice thingy, nope. This could give to the student of astrology an insight into the deeper significance of that greatly maligned planet Mars. For as the commander of the celestial armies, we must look to his influence for the courage, fortitude, strength, and the dauntless energy that will carry us on to final victory. In the fact, the true mystic teachings in regard to the planet will be revealed to man only when the 7 sisters comes from her hiding and begins to unroll the scroll of the 7th great race. It's gonna happen now. The allegory of Nikob, the sudden death of whose 7 sons and 7 daughters, symbolizing the 7 subraces of Atlanteans and their 7 branches, also refers to the cataclysms which occur at the close of the great race cycle, for she was a daughter of one of the Pleiades. Investigation by modern astronomers has confirmed the occult teaching that at the time the pyramid of Cheops was built, the Pleiades were directly overhead. These were the forces drawn upon the giants who accomplished the work over 31,000 years ago. According to Stinson Jarvis, quote, the 7 branches of the Druid Church and accompanying colonies were recorded through the descent from the 7 daughters who named the stars of the Pleiades. The reader will remember that the great fire signal, which exhibited the deity's consent from further life on Earth, was not given until the Pleiades were exactly overhead in the night sky. The constellation was the center of the priestly heavens and had the most honorable position on the neck of the constellation Taurus, who represented the bull and the thunder god of England. And when Homer names his famous constellation, he writes the name to make it fit the metre as Pleiades, using the whole word Pe to make another syllable, and also the name dove, which was always the name of Venus and the sign of divine love. The Druid college, which prepared the missionaries, was on the island called the Island Dove of Heaven, and the Greek name of the dove or pigeon was especially made of Pleiades. And Homer's writing in the Pleiades names these stars as the dove gods or priests because of the Druid mission carried a mission of love, referred to in Job in the sweet influences of the stars. Quote, the geographical uses of the Pleiades were partly as follows. The 7 parts of the early church, as spread out over the world, were her name and pictured in one cluster, each star or sign of honor being named as a daughter. These daughters are married to the male British deities whose name are week days, and their bear children, whose names are the patriarchs or father names of great and well-known peoples, such as Doranus, Lance Demon. And in this way, it becomes clear that the whole arrangement about to be described was part of the memory systems which the Druids and their branch priests used to record all kinds of information. It was the invention of memory system of the one church, the one candlestick of 7 branches, which as the picture was not exclusively Hebraic. As we know that the Pleiades were held secret from Peru to Java, and that these 7 stars received the names of the 7 branches of the church, it is clear that the system embraced the earth, which all the symbolic myth and legend, we must conclude that the sweet influences of the Pleiades are something that every soul should accept as a part of its heritage. But they can be obtained only when the soul is able to face the great initiator Saturn and answer his questions. Canst thou bind the sweet influences of the Pleiades, or lose the bands of Orion? Those sweet influences can never be ours until we can lose the bands which holds us to the limitations of the personality. In fact, it is the loosening of these bands which is the great purpose of evolution, and which is indicated in the digits from 1 to 9. Only when we reach number 9 and face our initiation and successfully answer these questions can we become more than man. I'm going to leave it there. That was a lot. So next time I'll go over the 7th letter and the tarot card. I hope you enjoyed that. And FYI, from my research, we are going back through the matrix to go towards Alcyone, which is the central sun for us. So yes, the Pleiades does hold huge significance to us because Alcyone is our central sun, supposedly. Okay, that's just my research. And we're headed back that way. I'm also a starseed from the Pleiades, so that's pretty cool. So I hope all of you enjoyed. I'm sorry for the outside noises. It's nice outside finally. And that brings everybody and their really loud machines and very loud cars and other things out. So I do apologize for that. Sending each and every one of you love and light. I hope you enjoyed that. It was lengthy, but really good. And I'll see you on the next one. Bye, guys.